The following program sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts.
About money, a different approach to investing you won't hear anywhere else. Your host, Mike Adams, is a registered investment advisor and works with investment portfolios exceeding over $100,000 in net worth, and has a proven track record of managing long-term investments surpassing the markets in the long term. The information shared on the following program is for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. And now, here's Mike.
It is Thursday afternoon, and we're talking about money. Could be Friday, too, because we're rebroadcast on Friday, and we're rebroadcast on Saturday evening. So if you miss any of the program and you were listening Thursday, you can pick us up on Friday, or you can pick us up Saturday evening. If you miss us on Saturday evening, you can find us on a podcast. So lots of opportunities. So I thought I'd start today with a quiz. I want to ask you from who said this quote. The quote is, "Our age of invention, these days of handcrafted miracles, they won't last much longer." Does that ever worry any of you? It seems likely that ours will be the last generation to ever gaze wide-eyed at something truly novel. That our kind will be the last to ever stare in disbelief at a man-made thing that could not possibly exist. We made wonders, that's true. But it won't be like this. It will be more technical, inside the magic box, not outside it. The machines are becoming so infernally complicated that barely a soul can even conceptualize how they work. And moreover, they won't need to in order to use the things. From here, we can only build incremental improvements, not revolutions, no new colors, just new hues. That's the end of the quote. Who do you think said that? I'm going to leave it to you because I'll answer that later in the program. Lots to cover today. I have a guest from a company that could be described as modernizing an industry that's essentially disappeared. That's coming today. I'm going to talk a little bit about my industry and commissions. We got paid when you did transactions, so there was incentive to churn and cause investors to pay more. In the last 20 years, the move has been to pay fees on assets under management. Get paid even when the account loses money. But there's something new. If you lose, you don't pay. And what is it? I'm going to talk about that later in the program, too. You know, I'm in a good humor today. That's true. But do you ever know where that phrase originated? Take you back to the 1840s. Ignaz Semmelweis was a young obstetrician in Austria, delivering babies, doing surgical work in Austrian hospital, and he noticed the babies delivered at the hospital had a higher rate of childbed fever. That was a fever where a woman died after childbirth. It was higher in the hospital than it was with home deliveries, significantly higher. Now, many of the obstetricians at the hospital performed not only births, but they also did autopsies. And he noticed that when physicians were doing autopsies and then delivering child, that the childbed fever frequency was much lower. And he came up with a simple suggestion. Maybe the doctors should simply wash their hands. Simple suggestion, but by doing so, it cut the number of childbed fever cases by 90%. Significant. You know, but for that, he was actually ostracized. That was before germ theory. We didn't have any idea of what germs were at that time. And what dominated the theory of biology was that diseases were a result of bad or imbalance in humors. So we got the phrase, someone has a good humor. That was the origin of it. Someone has a good humor means that they didn't have a disease. Interesting, huh? You know, poor Semmelweis was so criticized that it drove him mad, and he ended up in an insane asylum, all for the suggestion that washing your hands could reduce childbed fever. You know, that's the way we've seen some of the progression in medical. Skip ahead to 1918. Skip ahead to the Spanish flu. 19 million people would die in that pandemic. 19 million people from the Spanish flu. It wasn't until 1928 that Arthur Fleming came along, went on vacation, left one of his windows open, and some mold in one of the petri dishes grew. And from that came penicillin, and the beginning, the real beginning, of the pharmaceutical industry. But our understanding of medicine and biology is really very, very recent. But we have discovered recently is truly amazing. Taking a lot of information from the book The Gene, here's some of the things that we know. DNA, that big strand, I can remember on Time magazine, 1965, that there was a picture of DNA and Watson and Crick were noted. And I thought, so what? Well, it's really remarkable, the so what. DNA is composed of only 4 nucleic acids, just 4. There's adenine, which is denoted by the letter A, cytosine, which is denoted by the letter C, guanine, which is noted by the letter G, and thymine, which is by the T. And they talk about the letters in DNA. That's the ACGT. Those are the nucleic acids, and they're paired together, called letters. And what you find in DNA is there's 3.2 billion of those letters. 3.2 billion. If you printed those letters in a book, printed just the ACGTs, and printed them one after another, it would comprise 1.5 million pages. That's the DNA. 1.5 million pages. 66 times what the Encyclopedia Britannica is. That's what our DNA is. And it's broken up into 23 pairs of chromosomes, 46 chromosomes in total. But, apes and gorillas and chimps have not 23. They have 24. So what happened with human beings is we lost a chromosome, but we picked up a thumb. Interesting, huh? So those 3 billion letters encode just 20,687 genes, plus or minus. They're still looking. But a little over 20,000 genes is what we have. That's only 1,700 more, 1,796 more actually, more genes than a worm has. And most of the genes in humans are very similar to what a worm has. But if you want to compare our DNA to corn, we have 12,000 fewer genes in our DNA than corn has. And we have 25,000 fewer than rice or wheat. So think of this. Think of this. The difference between being human and being a breakfast cereal is not the number of genes that we have. It's the sophistication and the complexity of what they do. DNA itself is very, very inventive. It's incredibly complex. From the simplicity of those 4 nucleic acids, think about what our DNA does. They activate or repress actions in certain cells at certain times. And it's a nearly infinite variation. Single genes can cause other genes or combinations of genes to do certain actions at a given time and then close things off. Another gene will close that action off. Think of birth and the differentiation of cells. It begins with 1 egg and 1 sperm. And that combines into a DNA, and that DNA, genes will trigger certain genes to begin to form and divide that embryo. and slowly it will grow and it will differentiate. And it will so differentiate that it forms ears, but it only forms ears at one time and then it quits. You only get 2 ears, usually. Only a nose. It begins that at the time of birth, but it never continues. At some point, our DNA, those genes, decide to shut that off and quit producing. It's a dynamic kind of thing. It shuffles the sequence in some cells to make novel variants of itself. Some cells in the immune system secrete antibodies designed to attach to invading pathogens. But since pathogens are constantly changing, that DNA has to trigger those cells, those white blood cells, so that they recognize changing pathogens. You know, ever play a puzzle where you start with one word and you have to change one letter at a time to get to a different word? Start with the word hard to turn it into soft. You turn H-A-R-D into H-E-R-D to H-E-L-D to M-E-L-D and so on. That's what our DNA and those genes have the capability of doing. It's incredible, and they continue to do that throughout our lifetime. We're coming to a commercial break. Don't go away, because we're not quite finished talking about this, and we've got a lot more in the program to talk about. I'll be right back after the break.
About Money with Mike Adams will resume in a moment on Business Radio 1300 KKOL. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Did you know the 20-year annualized S&P return was 8.19%, while the 20-year annualized return for the average equity mutual fund investor was just 4.67%? That's a gap of 3.52%. It doesn't sound like much now, but it could mean the difference between retiring in comfort and running out of money. For some seniors, a gap that large could cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars and cut their retirement short. Don't run out of money. Call Mike Adams of Adams Financial Concepts today, 206-903-1019, and learn more about how you can, 1, create wealth for retirement, and 2, protect yourself from running out of money. Adams Financial Concepts specializes in creating and maintaining wealth. Call today, 206-903-1019, or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
We're back with more About Money. For details on what you hear on today's show, visit adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Now, here again is Mike Adams.
So if you had a moment of silence while you were listening to the radio, which you probably did, it was unintentional, let me tell you that, but it might be descriptive of what happens in our chromosomes. You know, I've been talking about genes. I'll finish talking about genes for a little bit. But on our genes, we have large gaps in space between the genes themselves. The genes are only a very small part of the DNA strand. They're less than 2%. 98% are long stretches in between the genes, and we don't understand why. Is it just functional, or is it just junk? You know, you can imagine making the trip from Seattle to Tokyo. You know, you've got a whole lot of ocean, and there's a few islands in between. That's what it looks like on the DNA strand. A whole lot of ocean with a few islands in between. It's really interesting. We don't know why we have those long stretches between genes. In some ways, genes are almost beautiful. On chromosome 11, there's 155 genes in what you might call a causeway that encode what we smell. 155 genes that tell us what we smell, distinguishing between spearmint and lemon and jasmine and vanilla and pepper. And the gene regulation, those 4 little letters, are set up in such a way that it only allows one of those smells to come through to our brain. Isn't that phenomenal? I think so. It's the combination which allows us to distinguish between thousands of different smells just from those 155 genes and how they're regulated. You know, the genes, the DNA is shrouded in history because there's some fragments of DNA that were derived from ancient viruses. You find pieces of DNA almost identical in so many different animals, from worms to yeast to a whole variety of things. Some of those sequences are repeated millions of times. We don't understand why. There's clusters of genes and 200 and so that regulate the fate, the identity, and the structures of the embryos and the organs. Only 200 genes. Think about that. Out of 20,000, 200. Yet they're the ones that turn on the development and then, at a certain time, turn off the development. It seems to know what to do. And there's thousands of pseudogenes. They look like genes. They appear like genes. Maybe they were once functional, but they no longer are. It's kind of like walking along the beach and you see all those crab shells. You know, the crabs have long gone and shedded those shells. Those are pseudogenes scattered throughout the chromosomes. The DNA accommodates enough variation to make every single one of us unique. And yet, every one of us very similar. We're humans. There's a huge difference between us and chimps and dogs and cats and rice and wheat. Our genes do that. And yet, every one of us is neat and unique. The first gene on the chromosome 1 encodes the sense of smell in the nose. The last gene encodes a protein that modulates the interaction of cells on the immune system. We understand the gene code, the 4 letters, but we comprehend at this point virtually nothing about how multiple genes spread across the genome coordinate expression to build, maintain, and repair human organisms. We understand it's used to build RNA, which is used to build a protein, but we're not exactly sure how that's expressed. You know, we don't understand the how and the why of the location of the genes and what's in between. But what we do know is that that our DNA is inscrutable, it's vulnerable to change and mutation, it's resilient, it's adaptable, it's repetitive, it's unique, it's poised to evolve and change. It's littered with debris of the past. It's designed to survive, and it resembles you and me. So why is that important? 50 years ago, when someone was diagnosed with cancer, for the most part, it was a death sentence. Oftentimes, I can remember grandparents diagnosed with cancer. They didn't want to tell the grandparents. They told the rest of the family, but it was really something that was a death sentence. Today, many cancers are treatable with chemotherapy, with radiation, with surgery. But the future, people are not talking about treating cancer. Fred Hutchinson doesn't talk about developing treatments. They're talking about a cure, an absolute cure. Just like a cure of pneumonia, just like a cure from the flu. You know, cancer is a disease where one of those letters mutates. A pair of AC becomes a mutation. And that causes cells to grow, and for other genes which would normally shut down those cells, that doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work. Those cells become invisible. If you ever watched Star Trek, you're aware of the cloaking device that they have sometimes. It makes the ship invisible. That's what happens with a cancer gene or a cancer cell. A gene mutates, it causes a cancer cell to be invisible to the white blood cells, causes those cells to be invisible to what's caused to express and kill those cells, so they continue to grow and grow and grow. Now we're talking about a cure in finding ways in which to manipulate the DNA to make the white blood cells recognize those cancer cells and destroy the cancer cells. The impact of that is some of the drugs and the treatments we have are going to be completely obsolete. Some of the pharma companies may go the way of Eastman Kodak. Eastman Kodak didn't recognize the impact of the digital camera. Will the pharmaceutical companies recognize the impact of a cure for cancer? Some companies will arise from nothing to take advantage. And that's just one of the impacts. That's where we live. And we're just at the very beginning of this whole process. At the very beginning. Think about what we've discovered. In the 1950s, we knew almost nothing about DNA. Today we can identify genes and some of what they do. So that brings me back to my last quote, to my quote. The quote was, our age of invention, these days of handcrafted miracles, they won't last much longer. Does that ever worry you? Part of the quote I left out, light bulbs, electricity. It seems that ours will be the last generation to ever gaze wide-eyed at something truly novel. And of course, the quote was from Thomas Edison, from the book, The Last Days of Night by Graham Moore, about Edison versus George Westinghouse and the dispute over the electric light bulb and whether we would have AC power or DC power. At that time, they believed that we were truly at the end of the age of innovation. There are people today that believe we have arrived at the end of innovation. Just isn't so. I hope you understand. Anyway, with that, I want to introduce my guest. He's Galed Berenstein from UTREP. Welcome to the program, Galed.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So let's start with your background.
Yes. So I grew up in Israel, and like so many other Israelis you might know, I moved to the United States as a teenager when my dad joined a startup. And I moved to a city called Spokane, Washington, that most of you probably know. And as an Israeli kid moving to Spokane, Washington, you can imagine there was quite a bit of difference. And that's really the way I got to the United States. And I got to watch my dad join a startup when I was 13, which is something that I was dreamt of doing, being an entrepreneur and starting businesses. And when I was 18, I came here to Seattle and went to the University of Washington. I've been here ever since.
Well, welcome.
Thank
so
you.
Let's talk about UTREP.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell us about UTREP. What is UTREP?
At a high level, UTRIP is a destination discovery and trip planning platform. We combine human experts like chefs, artists, historians, etc., with machine learning and artificial intelligence in order to make trip planning easy, enjoyable, and personal for travelers. That is really the focus of everything we do, is how do we make trip planning personal? And what we do is we license the software and all the data that we have about preferences to hotels, airlines, cruise lines, etc., so they can offer the same type of experience to their guests.
So, in some ways I think of this as modernization of an old industry. I can remember at a time when you walk through the mall and see 6 travel agents, when there was almost every street corner had its own travel agent, and then that all disappeared. There were reasons for it to disappear. The cost went away, and those travel agents they saw their business as planning for trips. But what you're talking about is traveling for an experience.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not about the transaction. It's about what you actually do. And that's what we believe people care about, what they see, what they experience, what they eat, smell, and taste. And that's really what we try to focus on. That's really one of the core differences between us and many of the new generation travel agencies like Expedia and Priceline that provide great service, but it's all about a transaction, not an experience.
So we're coming to a commercial break. We're going to come back and talk about this experience, because we live in an age where it's experience that's beginning to count. Don't go away. We've got a lot more coming. We're coming to commercial break. If you missed this program, you can hear it. If you're listening on Thursday, you can hear it Friday or Saturday. Be right back after the break.
More About Money coming up with Mike Adams on Business Radio 1300 KKOL. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Creating and maintaining wealth has been the specialty of Adams Financial Concepts for over 20 years. Every portfolio managed by Adams Financial Concepts is customized to fit each particular client's objectives and risk tolerance. The client's interest always comes first in portfolio decisions. Call Mike Adams today at 206-903-1019 or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com to check out their AFC performance. They welcome your review. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Now we return to About Money. There's more information waiting for you at adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here again is your host, Mike Adams.
I'm here with Gilly Berenstein. We started talking about UTREP, his company. So let's continue there. From the Mile High view, let's look at it from there, and then let's talk about the experience of the traveler itself.
Yeah, from the Mile High view, what we do is we use artificial intelligence to help people have really unique experiences. Travelers come in, they tell us where they want to go, when they're thinking about going there, and then they play with some really fun levers. They can say, I love history or arts, I'm a spontaneous traveler on a medium budget, whatever it may be. And our algorithms create 10,000 itineraries in 1/3 of a second, including not only your interest in your budget, but hours of operation, seasonality, geography, diversity, etc., to come up with a trip that's truly unique. And then the AI takes over. As a traveler engages, they say, I like this, I don't like that, more of this, less of that. It gets to know you and makes the experience ever more personal. So we hope the first time you use UTrip, it's a really good trip. Every time after that will be that much better. And that's really the promise we have for our travelers at a high level.
And so for the traveler themselves, let's take an example. Let's assume that somebody's coming to Seattle because we're familiar with Seattle. And let's talk about what's in Seattle. How many attractions are you talking about? If you get some of the travel guides, whatever, they say these are the top 10 attractions or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. So we think there's lots of great content out there, lots of great guides, including Rick Steves, who's a native of the Seattle area. And we think their curated recommendations are great, and we bring those into the UTrip system. Ultimately, we believe in a combination of experts in the crowd. We think that that gives the traveler the best of both worlds, bringing in recommendations from experts like Rick Steves or websites like TripAdvisor or our local experts like Tom Douglas and others, and combining that with the wisdom of the crowd, what other travelers liked or didn't like who were similar to you when traveling and had similar circumstances. The same person on a family trip travels very differently than if it's romance or business or something else, and we take that into account when planning a trip. So for example, in Seattle, we've got about 530 recommendations of activities and places to eat, plus a few hundred hotels and vacation rentals where one can stay. We don't believe that one needs to boil the ocean. And one anecdote that I love to tell is our expert in Rome told me that there are 5,600 pizza places in the city of Rome. We never strive to have 5,600 pizza places. We think at 100, we can offer diversity of price, experience, and location, which is ultimately what travelers are looking for.
So let's talk about some of the things, unique things that someone coming to Seattle might see.
Yeah, absolutely. So in Seattle, what we see that a lot of travelers like to leave the downtown core and to experience the various neighborhoods. And for any of you who've been to Seattle, you know that each neighborhood has its own very different feel. Ballard versus Capitol Hill versus the University District, etc. Each offers their own. So for one example, is the International District is very popular, especially with other Americans coming to Seattle to eat, as we're known as a pretty great food town. And a lot of travelers are looking to explore the International District and need some guidance because they might only have a couple hours throughout their trip to come out here. And they want to know the markets to go to, the best bakeries, restaurants, etc. And a mix of the popular restaurants and the popular sites that people know, as well as kind of those hole-in-the-wall hidden gems that are often just as good.
So give us some examples.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we see is that one of the favorite activities of our younger travelers is a bottle of wine at Sunset and Cary Park. It's an activity we put together. It's something that I personally have done before. And we see that's really popular with our travelers, especially in spring, summer, and fall. The weather is beautiful out here. Another thing that's really popular is going up to see some of the art galleries in the Soto area, south of downtown, and in Pioneer Square. On Tuesday night, there's an art walk. I believe it's on the first Tuesday of the month. And that's a really popular attraction that we get a lot of searches for. And then, of course, the Space Needle and Pike Place Market are everyone's favorites. And I think for good reason. Pike Place Market is one of those markets that's actually enjoyable to go to, not just a tourist trap.
So if someone was coming and they wanted to go to the Space Needle, you have the Space Needle there. You also have other attractions as well. You have Chihuly and you have the
EMP, and now I guess now they're calling themselves Mopop, as well as the Children's Museum. And one cool thing that our algorithm does is it takes into account what we call anchor items. So if a traveler came in and said, I really want to go to the Space Needle, our algorithms will take into account the geography of the Space Needle and recommend other things nearby since you're already there, things that you're going to enjoy. If you're with a family, maybe going to the Children's Museum, or everyone likes the Chihuly. And that's one really cool thing about our algorithms, because everyone's been on a trip where you've ended up zigzagging the city the whole time and spent more time in traffic than you did seeing the sights. We want to help our travelers avoid that.
So how does somebody go about logging on and checking out UTrip?
Yeah, so you can, of course, go to utrip.com, which is our direct-to-consumer site. But we've got 54 UTrip Pro partners. So these are attractions, hotels, or points of interest who have used our technology directly on their sites. So, of course, the Space Needle, a hometown favorite of ours, is a UTrip Pro partner. So travelers who go to their website, because that's something they know and they love, can not only get their ticket to the Space Needle, but can use the UTrip trip planner to plan their experience to the rest of the city. And we've got lots of partners, the Empire State Building, Hollywood Visitor Center in LA, and great partners all over the world.
So we're going to Boston in June. And, of course, we're going to a baseball game, of course.
Of course.
But so we're planning to go to Boston. And so I log into one of the sites. Give me an example and where we would find UTrip on that.
Oh, absolutely. So in Boston, we have a number of hotels that are using the experience in order to help their travelers have really great experiences. So there's a couple ways you can find that on those hotel websites. One is most of them will say, discover Boston or discover the city. And within there, you'll have the UTrip experience. Also, once you book your reservations, in the email confirmation, our hotel partners will send you an actual confirmation and a link into the UTrip itinerary. And because it's a smart system, it already knows your dates and knows where you're staying and knows that based on the type of room you have, what kind of a budget you're traveling on for this trip. And from there, we'll give you really great personalized recommendations on the web or on your phone.
So we often travel when we're doing a family trip. We will actually rent a house, cook a lot of our meals in the house. So we're not necessarily staying at a hotel, or it could be somebody that's staying Airbnb. It could be somebody like that. So how would they find UTrip?
Well, in that case, you can go to utrip.com and you can have all our destinations in one place. And we've actually built in the functionality for vacation rentals. We know that that's something that's really popular initially with younger travelers or budget travelers. Now it's really popular with everyone. And you can put in your Airbnb or your vacation rental directly into your itinerary. And just like with a hotel, the algorithm will take that address and will show you great markets and coffee shops in the neighborhoods and all sorts of things to do around your place.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
UTrip. You know, when you think about traveling and what it used to be with travel agents, and now even on the online with the Expedias and the TripAdvisor, it's really, in those cases, it's planning to go from one place to another place to getting a hotel. But what you're talking about is really an experience.
Yeah, 100%. And I think if many of us think of our grandparents and the way they traveled, we think of that tour bus that went from A to B to C. And to most of us, that sounds like torture. And that's something we're seeing universally be true. And I think as a society and as a people, we all want our fingerprints all over everything that is ours. And travel is at the top of that list. It's this highly aspirational thing that people think about. So we believe that travel should always be personal, and we believe that this smart technology is not there to replace the spontaneity, but to really give you an opportunity to discover the parts of the city that are going to be most meaningful to you and work for the logistics you need.
You know, when we travel overseas, for example, into a different culture, we will try to set up with a local guide, and to go at our own pace to see the things that we want to see. And so how do you accommodate that?
Oh, so we work with many great tour guides. So I mentioned the Expert Network before, and I focused on chefs, artists, and historians because those are some of my favorites, especially the food part. But ultimately, we bring in great travel agents as well as great tour guides directly into the U-Trip experience so they can share their knowledge with the crowd and as well so they can sell their services to travelers. And I'll tell you, I think a lot of people that have not had a great tour guide don't necessarily appreciate the amount of value that a great tour guide brings. But as soon as you have one really stellar tour guide, you'll never turn back. It's a great way to travel.
It is. And it's personal and it's an experiential.
Absolutely.
So again, tell us about U-Trip. How do we connect with U-Trip?
Yeah, so if you're a traveler and you love to travel just like me, check out utrip.com. If you're in the travel industry and want to offer personalization for your customers, go to utrippro.com and reach out to us directly. We'd love to talk to you.
That's great. Thanks for being on the program. It's an exciting venture that you're on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And it's a great thing you're doing.
Thank you.
I want to shift gears a little bit. When I started saying travel agents, when you look, they saw their business as trip planning rather than an experience. If you look at newspapers, we used to have 2 newspapers in Seattle. Now we have 1, and it gets smaller almost every day. We used to have record stores, like Tower Records was here. And that too, the record stores has essentially disappeared, replaced by digital music that you can download. It's the same similar situation in the financial services industry, and we're going through a significant change. I licensed in 1986, August of 1986, actually June of 1986. And at that time, we were seeing a division of labor into research function at the big brokerage houses. We were seeing some money management at mutual funds. We were seeing sales, customers, stockbrokers. And transactions were done on a commission basis where you only got paid as a financial advisor, stockbroker, if you made a trade. That's all changing. And I think it's going to continue to change dramatically in the next 5 to 10 years. I'm going to come back right after the break and talk about some of those things. Don't go away. We've got a lot to say. And if you miss any of this program, you can catch it on a podcast, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Don't go away. I'll be right back.
Stay tuned. About Money returns in a moment with Mike Adams here on Business Radio 1300 KKOL. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
How do you picture retirement? House on the beach, small farm in the country, traveling the world with your spouse. The one thing you don't picture is running out of money. Retirement dreams are shattered all too often by poor investment choices, sending many retirees back to work. If you think the job market is tough now, try entering it after you've retired. Don't run out of money. Start planning now. Call Mike Adams of Adams Financial Concepts today at 206-903-1019 and learn more about how you can create wealth for retirement and probably, most importantly, protect yourself from running out of money. Adams Financial Concepts specializes in creating and maintaining wealth. Call today, 206-903-1019, or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
About Money continues. Remember the website adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So I started talking about the financial services industry, my industry, because the changes that are going on if you're an investor are going to affect you. One way or another, it's going to affect you. So you should know what's going on. You should know what options are available. You should know what you can do and how you can improve your investment performance, how you can improve all the way around. So as I started and licensed in June of 1986, every firm was commission-based. And so you only got paid when you would trade either a stock or a bond or a mutual fund. And in those days, mutual funds used to pay up to 8% front load. And incidentally, some of that's not bad. If you're going to hold a mutual fund for 10 or 15 years, you're probably better paying 8% up front and not paying any of the trails than you are to pay every year. But that's another whole point. It was a time at which we weren't called financial advisors. That was to come in 1987. But in 1986, everybody was still a stockbroker. And you got paid when you traded in and out of stocks. And there were a number of us that did it the same way. We were stock jockeys. So you'd pick a stock, you'd build a position for a month, and then you'd switch to a second stock and build a position for a month. Selling to your existing customers, clients, selling to new clients that you would cold call. That's the way that I built my business, cold calling. Building the stock, sell with the stock, sell somebody a bond. Do it for a month, and then switch to a new stock. And eventually, some of those stocks would go up, or sadly down, but they would go up enough that you realized the value, and you would sell that entire position that you'd built with those clients during that month and buy the current stock that you were building. So suddenly, from building a position of 10,000 one month, you would sell, and you'd start that new month with 10,000 plus what you would add to it. And you'd build big positions, 100, 200,000 shares eventually. So when you traded, you had a huge revenue day. But I noticed when I bought one stock that I didn't want to sell it. I felt it had a tremendous potential for the future. And actually, there was a second stock that came along. I didn't want to sell that either. And while some of my compatriots were buying and selling that same stock when it would go up 10 points, they'd sell it. When it go down, and then it would drop back down, they would buy it back. But eventually, it went up, they sold it, and it kept going up, and then it went completely away. But there were a couple stocks that I wanted to hold on to. But I wasn't getting paid to hold on to those stocks. And for me, it was a way in which it made sense that not only did I want to get paid for selling and buying stocks, I wanted to get paid for holding on to stocks. So for me, I was one of the first to move into the fee-based business, to get paid on the assets under management, to get paid to watch and perform. And for me, it made a lot of sense too, because I became more and more convinced that my function and my value was to see that my clients did very well. But I wasn't alone. That was a thing that was beginning to happen throughout the industry, is a shift from commission-based to fee-based. Was driven a lot by the firms after 1987, because in 1987, when the market dropped off, the number of commission sales and revenues dropped dramatically. It is, incidentally, for the trading desk in the market today, for the firms today, they're seeing the same kind of drop. The fee base continues to pay on and on. In those days, the standard was 3% for the first 500,000 or 250,000, 2.5% for the next 500 or the next tranche, 2% for $1 million, 1.75 for everything over a couple million. Those are still my fees, because I think I'm worth it. But anyway, those were the standards. But as time went along, what happened is a number of people underperformed, and they got squeezed. When things are down, it's hard to see pain for somebody to keep you in things when things are not doing well. And when things are going up and you're not going up very, very aggressively, when things are falling and short of what things are doing, there's a squeeze on fees. That's going to continue. And these days, one of the new things that's happening in my industry is the advent of the Robo Advisor. Half the people, half the investors understand and know about the Robo Advisor. For me, it makes complete sense. Robo Advisors can take all your information, plug it into a financial plan, and do exactly the same thing as a financial advisor. You know, I've talked to several of my compatriots, some of the people, financial advisors in the business, and they say what they really bring to the table is they can hold hands. If things go down, they hold hands. I think that's a huge price to pay just to have somebody to hold your hand, but that's my opinion. Maybe you feel that's necessary. The biggest thing is the Robo Advisor is coming, and I believe they're going to continue to take market share, just like Schwab did when commissions became deregulated. I think that the Robo Advisor time is here. It's going to continue to grow. It's going to continue to take market share away and put tremendous pressure on financial advisors. The other thing that's happening, however, is it's possible now to do an account, to sign up and do an account that's profit sharing based. So financial advisors only get paid on the profits that they earn. If there's a loss in the account, they get paid zero. It's an interesting concept. It's something that we're one of the few, I think, that offers it. We may be the first in the state of Washington to offer that kind of account. Has to be an accredited investor, and our minimum is $500,000 versus $100,000. But I believe it's a real wave that's coming in the future. You only get paid a percentage of the profits. You don't get paid if there's a loss. That's one of the changes that's coming. So you have a couple things happening in the financial services business that are changing and will continue to change and will go forward for the next 5 years. Just as you heard about UTrip changing the travel to an experience from just a transaction basis, I believe that that's going to be happening in the financial services business, that we're shifting on the low end to those routine things. We'll shift to robo-advisors. And for those people who can do very, very well, we'll see a profit-sharing basis. Anyway, that's my insight today. Have a very wonderful weekend. And if you miss any of this program, you can pick it up. If you're listening to it today on Thursday when we're live, you can hear it on Friday. You can pick up some on Saturday. If you really like the program, you can listen to it all 3 days. You can like us on Facebook, About Money. You can follow us on Twitter, because as we go along, Sarah is tweeting. Here we go. And you can like us there too. So follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and keep listening to Adams Financial Concepts, About Money, and we'll be back next week. Have a great weekend. And until next Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, have a very wonderful time.
You've been listening to About Money with Mike Adams, a registered investment advisor. If you'd like more information about what you heard today, or about Mike's investment philosophy and strategy, or if you want Mike to evaluate your own portfolio, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com. The information shared on the preceding program was for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. Join us again for more About Money with Mike Adams here on Business Radio 1300 KKOL.
The preceding program was sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts. Creating and maintaining wealth has been the specialty of Adams Financial Concepts for over 20 years. Every portfolio managed by Adams Financial Concepts is customized to fit each particular client's objectives and risk tolerance. The client's interest always comes first in portfolio decisions. Call Mike Adams today at 206-903-1019 or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com to check out their AFC performance. They welcome your review. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
You can listen to 820 AM KGNW on iHeart.
The following program sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts.